Hi everyone, my name is Jake Smeester and I'm the Content and Media Specialist for Amazon Sumerian. Today we are going to be taking a look at the camera and light tutorial that you can find on our documentation and tutorial site. It is not a tutorial where we were going to be building a whole lot a scene so much as just looking at the various light and camera components and some of their basic properties. We will do some other tutorials that'll go much deeper into each of these components, but for right now we're just going to do a broad overview. Camera and lights are both really important to your scenes and how they affect the look of your scene and also how your users interact with the scene. And so it's an important thing. I hope that you enjoy this and that you can ask us again any questions in the chat window, in the chat room, on this page. You can go ahead and ask me any questions, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Okay, so let's just jump into it. I'm going to switch to my scene, and I have an open scene here. It's an empty scene. There's nothing in it except for a default camera. You got to have something in your scene, even in an empty scene. You have to have a default camera at the very least. Otherwise, you won't be able to see anything when you're editing. There is, of course, the grid is turned on, but this isn't an actual entity. It is just an editing tool that you can toggle on and off. It gives you some orientation of where you are in your scene. If you turn it off, as you notice, it just looks like a gray square. So we'll turn it back on. And where do we start? We're going to start by adding a couple entities to our scene. Without any entities, actually, let's back up. Let's just add some entities, and you'll kind of see how important lights are to begin with. So let's add a box. And there it is, our box. We see it in the middle of our scene, and we also see it over here in our entities panel. If you notice the color of this box, and by expanding the material component, you'll notice that the color of this box is this light gray, almost white color. It doesn't look that way, and you'll see why here shortly. I'm going to change this to a red, just to make it a little bit more interesting. And I'm going to add one other entity. So I go create entity, and I'm going to add a disk. This disk is going to act as kind of like a floor or a ground for us. And so it's in the middle of our box. So let's actually click on the box, move it out of the way so we can see our disk. There it is. Okay. So it has a diameter of about 1 unit, just like the box does as well. And so we need to do a couple things here. We need to first change the rotation of the disk to -90. And so you can actually see it flat on a horizontal plane. And then with the uniform scale selected, we're going to change this to 1000. There we go. Okay, so we have, oops, not 100, 1000. There we go. So it goes out pretty far. Looks like we're almost just in a dry, black desert plain. All right, so I'm going to select the box again, and I'm just going to move it up so it sits nice on top of the disk. If I want it to be exactly on top, then I will go 0.5. Okay. Now, the color of our disk is also this light white, almost this gray, almost white color. We're going to change it to green. Let's go dark green. There we go. Look like a football field of some kind. Okay, now I've now changed the color of both the box and the disk, but it doesn't look like anything's different. That's because there are no lights in our scene. For scenes to actually, or for entities to actually be viewable, other than just kind of this dark black, just depressing look to it, you need lights in there to actually reflect the colors. So what we need to do is we're going to go create entity again. And if you notice, there are 3 different light types down here: point, directional, and spot. We're going to choose a directional light. Nothing really changes yet except for one side of the box. That's it. Let me explain what a directional light is. A directional light essentially acts like the sun, is the best way to understand it, is that it shines from an infinite far away location. And so even though this, as you can see, the directional light is really in the middle of our scene, the direction from which the light comes from infinitely far away. And so it doesn't actually matter where it's positioned in the scene, or the translation is positioned. All that really matters is the rotation and the angle, and we'll show that here by changing some things around. So the reason why the only one side of this box is showing is because it is emitting from a straight horizontal angle. So that's why only one side can be seen, is because it is completely perpendicular to the directional light. I am going to move, actually, and I also forgot, let's change this light, the name, to directional light. I am going to move the translation. This isn't for any other reason other than it just helps me understand what's going on in the scene. So again, if I left it right in the center of the scene, it doesn't really make a difference, or a practical difference. Okay, so let's open the transform again. The main property value in the transform component that's actually going to make a difference is the rotation. So we can change it by scrubbing on these values here, or the way I like to do it is using the gizmos. So we'll click on the gizmos, and then we're going to grab the red ring, which correlates to the X rotational value. And I'm going to start moving this down and up. And as I move it, you see that everything starts to become lit. Now that it's at this 45-degree angle, or close to 45-degree angle, it's starting to light our scene much better. And as you can see, everything is lit because, again, this comes from infinite far away location. Now, as I move around, I can kind of tilt it this way. I can tilt it that way by changing the Y. At the way that's positioned right now, the Z value isn't going to really make much of a difference. But the X and the Y certainly will. And so you can, let me kind of get it back here. By adjusting your rotation, especially the X rotation based on its current location, you can kind of get, like, is it more in the mid-afternoon, or is it in the middle, or the beginning, or the dawn or dusk? Beginning of the day, end of the day. So that's what it's going to kind of emulate, is daytime where the sun is positioned in the sky. Okay, so that is the directional light. I'm going to collapse the transform panel, and then I'll expand the light component panel, or light component tab. And if we look here, the type for this light, I have it selected over here. Just because I named it directional light doesn't mean it is a directional light, but it's defined over here in the type, which is directional. I can, of course, change the color as well, and so if I change the color that it emits, it'll basically put a red tint on everything that this light shines. If you keep it white, then it'll basically be, it'll just shine it'll emit the right colors that for each entity. The intensity will actually controls how bright it is, so you can really wash everything out. And then the specular controls really how shiny the reflection is, or how shiny the light is reflected off of entities. So I'll rotate it here where you can kind of see. With the specular really high, it really blasts everything as it's shining on that one spot on the disc. And they correlate too also with the intensity and the specular. They do work together. So if I bring the intensity to about 0.44 and then bring down the specular, you see that it's not as washed out as much. It doesn't shine as much, as bright. So that's what those values do. Light projection. This isn't really going to make much of a difference with the directional light. Okay, great. Let's look at some other light types. Let's go ahead and click Create Entity again. And then this time we're going to select Spotlight. Okay, our spotlight is, it appears or populates in the middle of our scene at, the translation of 0, 0, 0. And unlike directional, the translation or location of a spotlight does matter. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of rotate it down this way. Actually, no, let's not do that. Let's change the translation first. Let's move it up. Why is that happening? That's very strange. I'm not sure why that's happening. Let's adjust some values here. Oh, I know why. I'm moving the disk. That's why. I thought I had the light selected. So, okay. So the disk, I want to return that to. My apologies. Negative 90, 0, 0, and then let's just have it at 0, 0. Okay. There we go. That was the problem. I didn't have the right entity selected. Okay, so with the light entity selected, this is a spotlight, so I'm going to rename it Spotlight. Okay, and again, it is positioned at 0, 0, 0, and that does matter in this for spotlights. So I'm going to move it up right here. Again, you can't see anything shining because it is shining. It is emitting light at a perfectly perpendicular angle to, well, a parallel angle, I guess, to the disk, but a perfectly, it's nowhere shining on the box. So what we need to do is we need to rotate again. And as you see, as we move it down, there it goes. It is now putting a spotlight. I'm going to hide the directional light. So just like as you would imagine a spotlight would be in the real life, it acts like a flashlight or a spotlight. If you close the transform and open the light component and then the general properties. Again, I don't have the right thing selected. Okay, so with the spotlight selected, the type is spot. We'll leave that. The color is white. Again, we can change that to, let's do blue and see what that looks like. The darker it gets, the less you can see things. So we'll just keep it back at a white light. The intensity in specular is the same as it was for the directional light. As you increase these, you want to keep these generally as a more medium, moderate values. The cone angle is going to be the angle in which the spotlight actually shines, or the cone of the spotlight. So as we increase it, it really widens up here, and bring it down, and it really narrows down to a fine, narrow beam. Penumbra essentially controls the feathering of the outside of the spotlight, and so if you increase it, you see it really feathers the edge of the light, and if you decrease it, I should say, it becomes very hard. I mean, this almost looks like a Looney Tunes type of cartoon light, where it doesn't feather, doesn't blend at all. So the more you increase that, the more it blends to the edges. And the range is essentially how far does it reach. So you decrease it, and the light doesn't reach. It can or can reach to the box or to wherever it is shining. We're not going to worry about light projection. We're going to look at shadows. If we do click shadows, we can get some shadows. Let's move this light a little bit more of an angle again, so you can see the shadows. There you go. You may have not even noticed this before, but the box now has a shadow. Before, you might have noticed that it did not have a shadow, so let's click that on. We're not going to really worry about most of these values, but these values do control the look of the shadows themselves and how they're filtered. So feel free to experiment with those. I will warn you, though, that shadows are very expensive, meaning it takes a lot of computing power to use shadows. So you may even hear my computer is really chugging along to make sure to keep up with these shadows. So shadows are important sometimes, they're not always important. So especially while you're editing, sometimes it's helpful to keep them off just to save on computing power. Okay. We're now going to hide the spotlight over here in the entities panel by selecting the eye icon, and we're going to add one more, which is a point light. I like point lights. I think they're cool. The reason why is because they act essentially like a light bulb. So now that it is in the center of our scene, we're going to raise it up. And as we move it around, you see that it acts like a light bulb. It reflects in all directions from the center of the light. I'm going to move this box up And then going to kind of tuck this light in between the disc. Oops, nope. Selected the disc again. There we go. This is what I'm trying to do. There we go. So it shines underneath the box. It shines on top of the disc. Of course, as you move it around, you can't see where the light does not touch on the other side of the box. If you open the light, general settings, again, it is set to a point light. The color is white. And the same thing here is that it has an intensity and specular, and the range, again, controls how broadly that light reaches. So if you really increase it, it can reach really, really far, like a really powerful light bulb, or you can make it a dim, small light bulb like you might find in Christmas tree lights or something like that. Okay. One thing to note is that for all of these lights, when you press play, right now you do see that there's a little globe here, a glowing globe. But if you press play, that will disappear. The light is still being emitted from that same location, but it doesn't exist there because that is more just for editing purposes and being able to visualize where your light is actually emitting light from. If you want to mimic an actual light bulb, then you would need to get a 3D model of a light bulb, and then you would place this light inside of that light bulb. Make sense? All right, so those are the three different light types. I'm going to increase the range here. And let's actually turn on our directional light too. So you see we have two lights there floating in the air. If I press play, they both disappear, but the lighting stays. Okay, I'm going to keep this, and we're going to look at cameras next. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop down this box to about here, but I want to increase the size of this box for a few different reasons we'll get to in a second. All right, so now we have a big box and a disc. It actually goes underneath the disc. It doesn't really matter. This is just so you have something to visualize and see. Okay, so let's move on to cameras. Again, if you go to Create Entity, and the very bottom, you have a category of cameras. There are 4: orbit, fly, fixed, and 2D. The orbit camera, we'll go ahead and select this, is the most common camera, and it actually is the same type of camera that you find here automatically in your scene, which is the default camera. The default camera is added to your scene. If you click on it and you open script and camera, pretty much everything is the same as it is here in the orbit camera. I'm going to delete, well, not yet, I suppose. I got to change some things. I'm going to delete the default camera here in a second, just so we can see things titled correctly. But the first thing that I need to do is that you see that as the default camera, it's selected as the main camera, meaning when I press play, the default camera is the one that is used in play mode. It's also selected as follow the editor camera, so wherever the editing camera is, when I press play, that's where your play view will start. So to delete a camera, you can't have it set as the main camera. You have to have any other camera set as the main camera. So I will go to Orbit Cam and go main camera and also follow editor camera. So I go back to default camera and then delete that and say yes. Okay, so now I still have an Orbit Cam. Again, it's the same thing as what I just deleted, but now we can at least see what we're dealing with. Okay, so a few things here. When you select a camera, you'll get a little window down here in the bottom left of your canvas. This is basically a preview of what your camera is seeing. Because it is set as the follow editor camera, your view here in your canvas and your view here in the preview are going to be the same because it's following the editor camera. They're acting as the same. But when you start adding multiple cameras into your scene, you might want to be able to see where that camera is actually positioned and looking. All right. Now, what does a orbit camera actually do? How does it actually operate? It operates like the Earth does around the moon. It orbits in a circular rotation around a center focal point. So right now, let's see, I'll select box and I'll press the F key, and the F key essentially frames that entity within view. This box is now the center focal point of my camera. So as I zoom out using the scroll wheel and I hold down on my right click on my mouse and I move around, I'm now orbiting in a circular fashion around that box. Now, if I hold shift and then use the left mouse arrow key and scrub over or move over, I pan from the left to the right or up or down. This is now going to change my center focal point. And so as I rotate, I'm now not rotating around the box anymore. I'm rotating somewhere over here. So if you want to recenter on the camera, on the box, then just hit F. You can do the same thing with the disc. Something interesting about disc, I selected it and pressed F. And then because the disc was so big, remember it was 1,000 units wide in diameter, it now is, to frame the whole thing in view, has to zoom way, way out. And also, it cuts off some of the disc, and that has to do with some of the property values that we have set for this orbit cam. We'll get to that here shortly. So let's go back. Let's select this. We didn't actually title this light. This is a point light. So that's selected. I press F. Oh, that one actually is pretty far out too. Let's do the box, hit F. There we go. Okay, so we're zoomed back in. Let me zoom out just a bit. And so that's the way an orbit cam works. It orbits around a center point. One thing to note is that when you zoom way in, it can't go any further it cannot go any further to where the point that it is actually zoomed in on. So you notice that I can't zoom in on anywhere. Even though I'm inside the box, I can't go any further than this. Because I'm really centered in on the very center of the box. I can go far out, but I can't go any further in. All right. So if I really want to actually get to a certain point, you got to use the scrub or the panning feature, which is holding shift and using the left mouse button or mouse left click. That's how you pan, and you can really get anywhere within a scene. But again, because it has that center focal point, it cannot go past that focal point. Okay, let's move on. Let's move on to the fly cam. Fly cam is really cool. It already actually titles it as a fly cam, so we don't need to change the name. It is now automatically positioned in the middle of the box, so I'm going to, because it's highlighted, I'm going to drag it out. Now if you notice, I'm going to open up the camera component over here. It's not set as the main camera, and it is not set as to follow the editor cam. I'm not going to set any other cam, at least for now, as the editor camera, because I want my orbit cam to be that camera. But right now, you can see this little preview down here in the bottom left. This is what the fly cam is seeing because I have it selected here in the entities panel. So although I'm moving around here with my editor camera, my editing orbit cam, the fly cam is seeing what you see here. And as I move it around, you see its view changes. All right. Now, what is unique about a fly cam? Mainly, it's how it actually operates in play mode. The cool thing is let's see. Nope, I didn't select this. I need to make fly cam my main camera so that when I press play, play mode defaults to the fly cam. All right, so I press play, and there we go. We are using the fly cam. The fly cam actually flies through the scene. So by using the WASD keys, which is W, A, S, and D keys, I can move forward, I can move back, I can move left, I can move right. And then just like a head on a swivel or your head on your own neck, you can move your head around, you can look around. So these keys kind of operate as in, like, if you're walking, you can walk forward, go side to side, and you can move your head around while you're moving. So that's a fly cam. Let's see, anything else to look at here? The fly cam does have an FOV, or field of view setting. So this essentially, the best way to describe FOV, or the field of view, is to see it in action. Okay, so you can see this kind of the view in which you see these wires. This is the field of view. So it's basically like, how wide is that field of view? So as I decrease it, it really narrows down. And you can also see it in that preview, how it starts narrowing down. So it's a very limited, narrow beam of focus. The more you increase it, it's very wide. So it's basically, think of it like this. It's like wide angle lens and very narrow angled lens. So where you can only see a very limited amount. 45 is kind of a standard FOV. So that's the fly cam. Let's look at another camera. Let's look at the fixed cam. Fixed cam is pretty simple. It's that it operates like a fixed camera. You can't move it when you're in the scene. Okay, so let's move it down here. Again, I'm using that preview to kind of see what we can see from the fixed camera's point of view. And field of view is also set at 45. I'm going to set it as the main camera so that when I go into play mode, it will default and switch to the fixed cam. So when I press play, there it is. There's my fixed cam. The thing about a fixed cam is it's fixed. You can't move it. So as I try to move my mouse around, nothing changes. As I try to use the WASD keys, it doesn't work because it's not a fly cam. Okay, and lastly, let's see, I'll stop the scene. The last thing we'll look at is a 2D cam. 2D cam is actually pretty unique. It's not going to be used too often because it has a very kind of unique use. So I'm actually just moving it around so you can get a better view. So you see where the view is, the angle of view. Swiveling this around, I'm trying to point this right at the box. And let's take the transform. I'm going to take it real far away. Let's just decrease the size of the box. That's probably a better way to do it. Okay. Box needs to be a little bit smaller. So let's go like 2.8. No. 2.8. There it is. Okay. Now, I'm going to go back to my 2D cam. I will set this one by opening the camera component, selecting it as the main camera. So when I press play mode, it'll switch to this camera. Now, one thing you notice is this camera can zoom in and out. Doesn't really move any because this can only see in a it's a 2D camera, so it only sees in two directions. It cannot see in 3D. This is basically an isometric camera, or as it's called here, the projection is a parallel camera. So think about games like The Sims. This is the kind of the view that you get, is that it's kind of, a lot of times kind of a distant view, and you can't see really the perspective of, or a 3D perspective of the scene. And so that's what a 2D camera is. It's not going to be used a whole lot. Again, it's for certain cases or certain types of experiences like The Sims. All right, so we're going to we'll stop the scene. One thing I do want to point out is, let's switch to Orbit Cam here. The camera component is going to have a lot of your basic settings, like main camera, follow, editor camera, and things like that. It's also going to have something that's important, which is called the clipping planes. The clipping plane is essentially how near it can see and how far it can see. So it can see anything that's within 1 meter of view, and it can see as far as, I shouldn't say meter, but unit. It can see as far as 1,000 meters. That's the far clipping plane. And so remember when I selected the disc and I put it in view, the reason it cannot see the rest of the disc is because of the clipping plane. This exceeds 1,000 units from where my camera is located and to where this disc is. That's the boundary of the view of my camera. So if I click on Orbit Cam again and I increase this to 5,000, there it is. You can see it again. but I can't really zoom out much more than that. So that's what clipping planes do. Usually the default is you're not going to have to change this too often. Most of the time, you can usually just keep it at 1000. So that's why it's kind of cutting it off. Now, if you're also wondering, what are all these cameras about? Those are just representing our other cameras that exist in the scene. Again, cameras are not a physically visible entity, so you're not going to be able to see them. And as you zoom in, you see they all really just kind of stay the same. No matter where they are or located in your scene, they're going to kind of stay the same size. And it just kind of like the light exists in editor mode, same thing with the camera. If I press play, oops, I need to make my orbit camera as the main camera. As I press play, of course, those cameras disappear. Those are just for editing purposes that they allow you to see where they are within the scene. So that is the camera and lighting components within Amazon Sumerian. Pretty cool stuff. Oh, there's one thing I forgot to show you that I want to show you. If you open up script, there's a bunch of more options down here. The reason is a script is added to each camera, yes. And as you select on these different cameras, the fixed cam actually doesn't have a script because it doesn't change at all. The scripts allow you to control it in different ways. And so the scripts are going to have larger, or under the script component, you're going to have a lot more property values to change and properties to mess with and experiment with. So that's where kind of like the more detailed section of the cameras will come in, and we'll cover that in a different video. But for now, that is the general concept of lights and cameras. Pretty cool stuff. They're fun to play around with. It's cool to see how lights and cameras kind of make your scenes come to life, and to experiment with shadows and things like that. It's fun stuff. So let us know if there's any questions we can answer for you. Feel free to post your questions in the chat room here on this Twitch page. You can also send us any questions on Slack, amazonsumerian.slack.com. You can also find most of us on Twitter. I am at Jake Smeester at Twitter. So find me there, ask me questions, let us know how we can help you create better scenes and how we can assist you in creating cool applications. We love the community that's being built, and we want to build on what we got going and just make this a really great tool and useful tool for everyone. So again, reach out, keep building. We love it, and we'll talk to you next time. Thanks.